This video is sponsored by the Magic Candle Company. Visit magiccandlecompany.com and use the offer code OFFHAND15 for 15% off your entire purchase.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Now, I mean, you guys know me. I've talked about the mistakes Disney's made in the past. I've talked about my own mistakes that I've made in the past, in the comments usually. But just because Disney makes a bad ride doesn't mean they shut it down almost immediately. I mean, look at this. Yeah, it's still there. Sometimes the rides they take away are good, other times they're terrible. Most of the time, they're terrible. And it's interesting sometimes watching Disney backpedal on a ride they thought may have done well, but didn't actually end up performing in the end. Like, remember Luigi's Flying Tires? Yeah, that didn't last very long. And just like it, I'm going to talk about 10 of the most short-lived Disney attractions. Ones that closed in record amounts of time. Today we're looking at some ideas, most in early Disneyland, of course, that didn't end up working out. And for one reason or another, they were closed after however many months. And now prepare yourself for my top 10 short-lived rides at the Disney parks, including the Rocket Rods. Yeah, you know what? No, let's just start there, alright? Speaking of the Rocket Rods, they were a quote-unquote high-speed thrill attraction located in Tomorrowland at Disneyland. The Rocket Rods replaced the very popular and extremely relaxing People Mover, something you could do for a quick break in the middle of the day and get nice views of Disneyland. Michael Eisner, of course, thought that this wasn't good enough and that Disneyland needed more thrill rides to attract the young audiences. You know, people like you and me who hate the People Mover, right? Right? So they retrofitted the People Mover track and added new ride vehicles that were able to go faster, and the Rocket Rods were born. Of course, though, the People Mover track that had been operating for the better part of 30 years was not built for things going 35 miles per hour. The People Mover instead went 7 miles per hour, so you can see where the problem started to arise. The track was breaking, and on top of that, it would hardly ever operate properly. And so, just 2 years and 4 months after it opened, it closed. People thought that this would just be a maintenance refurbishment, but as we all know, it never ended up opening, ever again. And now, the track sits abandoned, empty, and sad to this very day. But keeping hope alive that maybe one day, the original People Mover will return to its home at Disneyland. We can only cross our fingers and hope. Luigi's Flying Tires is sort of infamous these days. It was essentially a retread of the Flying Saucers of Tomorrowland found at Disneyland that was open for the better part of 5 years. The Flying Saucers had problems though. It was really hard for guests to move their UFOs and the guest throughput per hour was extremely low. And so it closed, like I said, about 5 years later and was replaced by the Tomorrowland stage. Walt Disney Imagineering, thinking that they could solve the problems presented by the 1961 Disneyland Classic, opted to try again with Luigi's Flying Tires at Cars Land at Disney California Adventure. It was an opening day ride for the land, and it all went about as well as you can guess. The very same problems that the Flying Saucers faced reared their ugly heads with the Flying Tires. The ride was so hard to control and so, for lack of a better term, boring, that Disney added inflatable beach balls for people to throw at each other while they rode it. And of course, eventually, due to safety concerns, they had to take away the beach balls. And I mean, what's even the point of riding Flying Tires if you can't toss a beach ball at your buddy's head as hard as you possibly can? The ride, of course, closed in February of 2016, about 2.5 years after it opened, and was replaced by a trackless spinning ride called Luigi's Rollickin' Roadsters, which is marginally better, but staying in Disneyland for another short-lived attraction that was a sort of consequence of the early planning stages. The Autopia we know today, which began as the Fantasyland and Tomorrowland Autopia, which began as the Junior and Regular Autopia, opened very early in Disneyland's history. Regular Autopia was an opening day ride in 1955, and Little Junior opened a year later in 1956. You know how Rise of the Resistance is an extremely popular ride that guests will line up hours early to get a chance at riding? The Autopia was like early Disneyland's Rise of the Resistance. People couldn't get enough. They wanted to drive these gas-powered cars down the highways of the future, and the demand was massive. And so, in order to alleviate some of the stress on the main ride, Disney opened up the Junior Autopia. Don't let the name fool you though, the cars themselves were the same size as the regular version. The track was just shorter. You would go through tunnels, around the lagoon, and over bridges, seeing all of the sights that Tomorrowland had to offer, including the yet-to-be-built People Mover. over. Imagine it there, gliding over the trees. Like the other two entries on our list though, this ride lasted for about 2 years before it was replaced by the Fantasyland Autopia. Now, just like the Matterhorn, there were 2 versions of the same attraction you could ride through various different points of different lands. And eventually in 2000, the 2 separate tracks were removed and replaced by one giant track, the one that we're familiar with today. So I mean, technically you can still ride down the old avenues of the Fantasyland Autopia. It's just not called the Fantasyland Autopia. Okay, let's get out of Disneyland for a second. Let's leave, okay guys? I'm getting tired of Disneyland. Let's go to the mother of all abandoned and lost attractions, Epcot. We're going to take a look at one of my favorite attractions at the entire Walt Disney World Resort, Journey into Imagination. But not the original version with Dreamfinder, and not the one you ride today with Nigel Channing and Figment. No. This is the one that came in between, the one with just Dr. Nigel Channing. I'm sure people are familiar with both the classic and the version that exists today, but not the one that came in between. You see, just like how the original was chock full with whimsy and imagination, and the new one is sort of half and half between Nigel Channing trying to be serious and Figment trying to inject that classic whimsy from the original Journey into Imagination into the Imagination Institute. Journey into Imagination was just Nigel Channing doing his grumpy old man kind of thing. So imagine today's Journey into Imagination with no upside down house, no Figment, no song, it's just Eric Idle telling you you have a terrible imagination. And because of this, guests absolutely hated the ride. And so just 2 years and 7 days after it opened, it closed because Disney realized they had made a massive mistake. And I'm sure they're glad these days that they decided to keep Figment around because he's so marketable. But for some people, even this new version of Journey into Imagination isn't enough, and they want to go back to a full recreation of the original, and I gotta say I'm with them. While I do enjoy Journey into Imagination with Figment, I think the original is much more timeless. Like I said a few videos ago, it feels like you're walking right into a 90s movie, and I think there's a reason they left the Imagination Pavilion out of the new announcements for Epcot. I think something big is coming. But until then, we can look back at Journey into Your Imagination as a scathing reminder of what not to do when renovating an attraction. Do you guys ever see the picture or videos of Walt Disney riding the Viewliner and say to yourself, what is that? It's not the monorail. You see, the Viewliner was sort of an early testing ground for the Disneyland monorail. Like the monorail, it would loop through parts of Tomorrowland and Fantasyland, and, just like the monorail, it was designed by legendary Disney Imagineer Bob Gurr, who actually recently just celebrated his 89th birthday. Happy birthday, Bob. The Viewliner opened in June of 1957 and lasted just over a year, closing in September of '58. Now, like I said, I don't think the reason for this closing was that it was a bad attraction or that it didn't work. I'm of the opinion that the Viewliner was a way for Disney to sort of soft test the monorail before it opened. Granted, the monorail was much more expensive and way different from the Viewliner. I think Disney just wanted to see what kind of kinetic energy it would add to Disneyland and how guests would respond to another railroad type attraction. And even though it's closed, I mean, look on the bright side, we have a monorail now. We can ride to the Disneyland Hotel, and by extension Earl of Sandwich. If that's not an upgrade, I don't know what is. Don't let the name fool you, there are no ghosts on this attraction. Unfortunately. The Tomorrowland Phantom boats opened with the rest of Disneyland in July of 1955, and they lasted just over a year into August of 1956. Now this ride sounds super fun. You can take a small motorboat out onto this lagoon and cruise around for a couple minutes and come back. Problem was that the boats would overheat and shut down, forcing cast members to row out to them and tow them back to the dock. After this many entries on the list, I'm pretty sure that the Tomorrowland Fantasyland area of Disneyland is cursed. They debuted as the Tomorrowland boats, but just a month after opening, Disney decided to refurbish the ride, making the boats look more futuristic and renaming them the Phantom Boats. They even added cast member drivers to the boats just so guests couldn't crank the gas, causing the boats to overheat even more. But this of course costed Disney money, and just a year after it opened they decided to shut it down. Now the closest we can get to a motorboat cruise at Disneyland is in Fantasyland, riding across a mini patchwork quilt. Yeah, close enough. Man, California Adventure was an absolute piece of trash when it opened. Okay, maybe not that bad, but it was not good. We've talked about it before, I mean, who hasn't? But let's go over it real quick because it still bears mentioning. Superstar Limo opened with the rest of California Adventure in 2001, back where Monsters Inc. is today, by Tower of Terror, or I guess Mission Breakout now. This was a dark ride that would take people on the streets of Hollywood to see the stars and the sights of Los Angeles. Different cities, I know. The only problem though is that Superstar Limo was extremely low budget and sometimes disturbing. I mean, look at these superstars. They're the stuff of nightmares. And just like Journey into Your Imagination, people hated this ride so much that it closed after just 11 months of being open. It was such a mess. And it was really indicative of what Disney California Adventure was at the time. Something thrown together very quickly, under budget, and lacking that Disney creativity. Mike and Sully to the Rescue is better, and there are references to this old terrible ride in it, but I'm personally hoping that someday something better comes along, like, I don't know, Runaway Railway. No wait, that's going in Toontown. How about a Woody's Roundup animatronic show in the style of the Country Bear Jamboree? No, that's stupid. That's a terrible idea. Back again to opening day Disneyland, because that place was the Wild West. I mean, both literally and figuratively. You see, unlike today where Main Street USA is a series of shops owned and operated by Disney, back during the early days of Disneyland, the company would rent out these different stores on Main Street to different companies, like the Maxwell House Coffee Shop or Jimmy Star's Show Business Souvenirs, whatever they sold. And if you walk down Main Street USA today and look to your right-hand side, you'll notice a store with a porch and a locked door. This used to be the Intimate Apparel Shop featuring the Wizard of Bras, one of the most famous extinct Disneyland attractions, and I guess in this case I would call it an attraction, because inside, standing amongst the ladies' wear, would be a giant, sort of semi-animatronic wizard persuading you to buy underwear. And if that's not just postcard, picture-perfect Disneyland, I don't know what is. Of course, after about 6 months, Walt said to himself, "Hey guys, why are we selling underwear on Main Street?" And the store was closed. But it remains alive in the hearts and minds of Disneyland parkgoers to this very day. So if you walk past the store on Main Street with a little porch out front, go ahead and sit down on one of those chairs and realize you're about 10 feet away from where the mythical Wizard of Bras once stood. This one, believe it or not, is at Disney's Animal Kingdom at Discovery Island. No, not that one, the other one. This one closed because guests didn't really have an idea of what they were getting themselves into when they stepped on the boat. It would take you on a tour through the rivers of the park, showing you different scenes featuring different animals from different lands and countries all around the world, including some that were mythical. At least that's what you all thought. Disney pulled another fast one on you. Although the original purpose of the boats was to transport guests around the park, not so much a show or a ride. And people did not like this, and the boats were considered boring and long and more or less a waste of time. And so, after about 6 months of operation, Disney changed the name of the boats to get across the fact that this was mainly intended for transportation. The name was changed from the Discovery River boats to the Discovery River Taxi, but the original incarnation lasted for just 6 months. All 3 incarnations, that's right, there was a third called the Radio Disney River Cruise, yay, lasted just over a year and still managed to disappoint guests every single day until its closing. Except for that Dragon Cave Mark talked about. That was pretty cool. Epcot used to be an entirely different beast, guys. It used to be about edutainment, okay? And it was extremely bad at doing this. There's one thing opening day Epcot has over today's Epcot, and that's Horizons. That's about it. Not sure what it is people see in early Epcot. Anyway, we're going to go to Communicore, which eventually turned into Inventions, which eventually turned into a pile of rubble, to watch the Astuter Computer Revue. Hosted by a tiny holographic version of Broadway dancer and singer Ken Jennings, this show, featuring a song written by the Sherman Brothers, would teach guests about the computers of the 80s. They're big, they're slow, but at least there's a fun song written about them. This is an interesting original Disney IP that only lasted about a year and is relatively obscure, even among Disney fans. But you can see with this video, shot by Fred Vision 1982, it was a simple show that showed off the beating heart of Epcot Center back in the day, the server and computer room, and featured Pepper's Ghost illusions of, like I said, tiny Ken Jennings and even an animatronic from Food Rocks. No wait, the other one. It lasted for just about a year before it was replaced by a similar show not featuring Tiny Ken though. Unfortunately, he's gone. But the song still lives on in my head because I can't get it out of there. because it's such a good song. The Sherman Brothers know how to do that. If you're interested in watching most of the original shows, I'll link it in the comments down below. I'm surprised this video only has about 4,000 views. It's a very interesting and obscure piece of Disney history that I think more people should watch. So what do you miss the most? Maybe it's the Discovery Riverboats, maybe it's Tiny Ken Jennings, and maybe, just maybe it's Superstar Limo. No, I'm kidding. Leave a comment below, tell me what your guys' favorite short-lived Disney attraction is. Me, personally, well, I don't miss any of these rides. I just absolutely despise the Rocket Rods for breaking the People Mover track! I'm not gonna get into it right now though, okay? I'm just gonna move on. Bring it back, Disney. This is your monthly reminder from Offhand Disney, hashtag bring back the People Mover. Hello everybody, thank you for watching this video on my top 10 personal favorite short-lived Disney rides. Some of them, 2.5 years all the way down to a couple weeks, which is interesting. Of course, there's probably a ton that I missed, but those aren't the ones I wanted to focus on. I just wanted to focus mainly on these weird early Disneyland rides, mixed in with a couple early Epcot rides, because they are kind of a mess. You do see, though, on the left-hand side, the names of my Patreon supporters scrolling by ever so quickly. Honestly, it's too fast. I think they should each have their own video, but that would be a lot of videos. If you want to be a part of this exclusive club, head over to the link in the description to my Patreon, and even just $1 gets you access to early episode audio and sometimes even early episodes before I upload them to the public. If that sounds interesting to you, please consider supporting and even following me on Twitter to keep up with things that are going through my head, like how I'm planning on transitioning Offhand Disney to a Disney sweater-themed YouTube channel. This is not a joke. Last things last, though, I wanted to quickly thank the Magic Candle Company for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in getting something for your loved ones or your friends for holidays or birthdays even, dare I say, use the other link in the description down below and get your candle on. Use offer code OFFHAND15, 15% off your whole order. The more you buy, the more you save. Yeah, you guys know the deal at this point. After all that, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I feel like this was sort of a short-lived video. I always hate leaving you guys, but until next time, thank you, and goodbye.